Hi, my name is David Peterson and I'm a language creator. I've been creating languages for fun since 2000. I've been creating them professionally for the last 10 years. I'm often asked why I create languages. Why create languages when there are already so many in the world? Well, I thought I would give you a little bit of my history with language in general to try to help elucidate this point. So kind of sit back, snuggle in, and let me introduce you to my family, at least going back to my great-grandparents. So these are my wedding photo of my great-grandparents, Maria y Abundio Ortiz. They got married in Mexico and then moved to the United States, where they had two children, my grandfather Alvaro and his sister Elisa. And you can see them right there. They're really, really, really cute. And they grew up to be, very good looking. We have great genes in my family. I was quite fortunate. My grandfather married a cousin named Carmelita, and that she is my grandmother. And they had three children, again, still in the United States. Here, my mother Sandy and her two brothers, Richard and Ben. Now, up to this point, everybody, well, except perhaps with the exception of my great-grandparents, everybody was bilingual in English and Spanish. My parents and my mother and both of her brothers grew up bilingual in English and Spanish, which was great. They can now all continue to speak Spanish to this day. With me, though, something different happened. So this is a picture of me with my cousin, by the way. And incidentally, compare this picture to the picture of my grandfather and his sister. Don't we look almost exactly alike? It's really cute. Anyway, my mother married a man that I never really met. He's the guy in the middle there with the long hair. He was out of my life at about 3 months. After that, my mother married a man who was the son of Armenian immigrants who were escaping the Turkish genocide. And he didn't really want us to have any contact with my mother's side of the family. So at that point, where I was interacting all the time with my mother's family, it really kind of lessened to a degree, and then stopped altogether when we moved to Fresno, away from LA Orange County. And at that point, any instruction I had gotten in Spanish, anybody who had been speaking Spanish to me, that all kind of stopped. And so my ability in Spanish also lessened to a great degree. And that continued to be the case even after we moved back home, where I discovered that I couldn't really understand my relatives who were speaking Spanish. The only one that I could somewhat understand was my grandmother, the one with whom I had spent so much time as a young child, and there she is. By the way, of course, my mother remarried. She has a great stepfather. I'm sorry, I have a great stepfather now. She has a great husband, Steve, and that's my sister there. Anyway, so at that point, I decided to kind of rebel against not just Spanish, but language in general. It was such a bother to me that not everybody spoke English. I spoke English and I spoke it well. Most people around me spoke English. Why would anybody bother with speaking another language? That continued even on into high school, where when I decided to take a language, I took Spanish because it was easy, not because I was interested. And frankly, I was just so cool as a teenager. I really didn't need to be bothered with such things anyway. So I took Spanish and whatever, until one day where for absolutely no reason whatsoever, when I was 17 years old, I woke up and discovered that I had a burning desire, based on deep shame and humiliation, to learn the French language, because I was so ashamed that millions of people all across the world spoke French and I wasn't one of them. I was being left out. I was missing out on something. And then, of course, I thought about it for a second. It was like, wait a minute. It's not just French. There's got to be 100 languages on the planet, at least one for every country. I had no idea how many languages there were at that time. So I said, I've got to learn them all. I have to learn every single language on the planet to fluency because they exist. And because, I don't know, I just thought they were cool. Now, why French? Why French started? I don't know. It could be because that at the time I had a girlfriend who was the president of her French Honor Society. There she is. And here's a better picture with her husband. Now they're friends. But anyway, I said, well, French, I've got to start somewhere, so let's start with French. But luckily, I had a friend, Tao, who was learning French on her own, or had learned French on her own. And so she lent me her book, which was this one, which is a teacher's edition, called Et vous, or so I thought at that time. Anyway, and so I started to just kind of go through this book and learn it. I found it very comprehensible, of course, since I had a lot of Spanish background. And I decided to start reading it. And I remember I opened up this initial dialogue and was reading it to my girlfriend over the phone. And she just got an absolute kick out of it because the way I pronounced it was roughly like this. Salut! Salut, ça va? Oui, ça va. Je m'appelle Serge Martin. Et toi? Je m'appelle Isabelle Leclerc. Tu es nouvelle? And so on and so forth. Anyway. So she was just laughing up a storm at this because, you know, that's not actually how you pronounce French. You don't actually pronounce French with kind of a vague French accent and then Spanish pronunciation most of the time. In addition to studying French on my own, I also decided to study Latin, not because I had any burning desire to learn Latin or even knew anything about it, but just because, well, we had a book. It was this book, in fact. It had a fancy cover before it fell off. And it is indeed Wheelock's Latin. I thought it wasn't because it was a different one, but it turns out it was. Anyway, so I started going through that and studying that on my own in addition to French. The next year, I had the opportunity to add another course, an elective in high school. And so in addition to taking AP Spanish, I took German 1 with a bunch of freshmen. It was very, very fun. I had just loads of fun studying German. I don't really have a book for it or a picture associated with it. So here is a picture of a very fine soup that I had in Germany in 2014, a pumpkin soup. It was autumn. It's a soup I'll remember for a long time. But anyway, after high school, I started college at UC Berkeley as a freshman, and I had all of these empty credits because I came in as an English major, and I had one class to take for that. No, 2 classes to take at the time. And so I filled up the rest of my empty credits with languages. I started with Arabic the first semester, and that was the only language I took then because I didn't know how I would adjust to college. And discovered that, you know, studying languages was just fun, right? And it was a really big deal. And so then the next semester, I took my second semester of Arabic, and then I also added Russian and Esperanto in addition to my English major courses. Esperanto is a language that was created in 1887 by Zamenhof, a fellow named Zamenhof, who thought that if everybody spoke the same language, there would be no more war. Anyway, this was the first time I'd ever heard of somebody creating a language. And yes, I had heard of Star Trek, I had heard of Tolkien. I had no idea that Klingon was an actual language. I had no idea that Tolkien invented languages. I had no idea at that time. Remember, this was 1999, 2000. This is before the movies came out. So anyway. But so as far as I knew, Esperanto was the only language ever created aside from the other competitors for Esperanto like Volapük and Novial and Occidental, essentially languages that competed with Esperanto, but Esperanto won. Anyway, so with all that in mind and with my interest in language, my mother suggested that I take a course in linguistics, which sounded silly to me. Because why would you take linguistics? You didn't even bother learning the languages. I didn't understand the point. But I took it anyway. I also took French because, you know, I finally got a chance to take formal French. And so I learned a little bit. But taking linguistics was such a huge eye-opener for me because it introduced me to the concept of language without associated pressure. Because, I mean, look at this. As a linguist, you just get to look at all this language data. Like, you know, there's Farsi and Ganda and Turkish, all this stuff just sitting there. And you can play with it, you can look at it, you can see how the language works, but you don't actually have the pressure of learning it. It's not like when I was growing up and felt the pressure of not being able to understand or communicate with my relatives. Feeling the pressure of needing to learn to speak Spanish because it was my family's language, and I should have been speaking it anyway. But anyway, and there's also no pressure associated even with taking a language course, because there, of course, you're graded. It's like you have to kind of interact. You have to do things well enough to get a decent enough grade. You have to learn it. But with linguistics, all that language data was just sitting there. And you could just kind of play with it and do whatever you wanted with it without having the pressure associated with language learning. And that led to the next logical leap for me. So you can kind of see in the corner there, you'll see some stuff that might look like Arabic, but isn't actually really Arabic. Those were the rudiments of my very first created language, because it was in my linguistics course that I got the idea, what if I created a language not for international communication like Esperanto? That one already won. What if I created a language just for myself, just for my own personal use, just for fun? And so when I thought of that idea, I immediately started to do it. My very, very first language was called Megdevi, that I created in the year 2000. It seems like a strange name for a language until you realize that at the time I had a girlfriend, her name was Megan, and my name was David, and now the name of the language makes more sense. It's just much, much, much more embarrassing. And if you look at my notebook from the time, so this is sophomore year at Cal, and as you go through it, you'll see that there are just tons and tons and tons of notes in the margins where I am just basically creating my very first language, creating Megdevi. That was how it started in the margins of my notes. And so you might ask, well, what was this language like? It turns out my idea for how to create a language, how to create something fun that I would enjoy, would be to simply copy what I liked from other languages. So at the time, I was learning lots of new stuff in linguistics, and I was also really enamored of the Arabic language. I loved it. And then also I knew about Esperanto. So here, for example, you can take a look, and if you look at the writing system, you see that on top is Arabic, on the bottom is Megdevi, which kind of looks just like a crappier version of Arabic. And this, by the way, says, "Luke, I am your father." And before you say it, I know that the real line is, "No, I am your father." But the thing is, if you say that and nobody knows you're talking about Star Wars, you have to put Luke in there. Anyway, so comparing the two writing systems, here are some characters that were basically directly copied from Arabic, but slightly altered. You can see that the T, rather than being the two dots, now it's just a line on there, but otherwise it looks like the T of Arabic. The L is exactly the same. The little circle in Arabic means that there's no inherent vowel, and I used that to make the short U sound. The other two diacritics, the slash above and below, are exactly the same as they are in Arabic and in Megdevi. The little character for Ain in Arabic, I repurposed as a T sound. And then the character for R in Arabic, I repurposed for a Ya. So I just kind of copied it, but made it worse. I also did the same thing with the grammar. In order to give you an idea of how this works, I need to introduce you to a little bit of Arabic grammar. So in Arabic, there are triconsonantal roots, like this one, K, T, and B. And remember, Arabic is written from right to left, so the K is on the right side in the Arabic script. And what happens is that in Arabic, you can make a bunch of different words that are essentially variations on a theme, where these three consonants always appear in the same order and everything changes around it. So for example, in Arabic, you have a word like katib, which means writer, maktab, which means office, and kitab, which means book. Kutub is a plural, books. It works with the verbs too. Naktub is we write, aktub is I write, katabat is she wrote in the past tense. If you examine a system like this, you may come away with an incorrect impression that, like, for example, if you look at 5 words like this, you might think, oh, I see what's happening. There is a single root here with these 5 words, katib, writer, walid, father, nadil, waiter, sa'iq, driver, and talib, student. So it's the same root, so the same vowels. You just change the consonants, and you get a word that means a human. Of course, if you look at other words of Arabic with the exact same pattern, you'll see that that doesn't actually hold up, because honestly, things like that rarely hold up in natural languages. But in a created language, I thought, well, perfect. I'll just go ahead and do that. So I have my pattern for humans, and you see David, man, Megan, woman. Yes, it was that embarrassing. Neches, cleaner, Regan, thief, Leishith, dancer. And I also did this. So you can see the words for man, father, brother, prince, and merman are all the same root. You just changed the last consonant. So I did that. In addition, I decided, well, let's also have some roots just for things I like juice. So you have maitli, apple juice, veti, orange juice, and then for the colors, ishna, blue, mixa, purple. And that's useful sometimes. You can see we have a word for grape, nethel, and then from that, derived from that, you have nathli, grape juice, and nethla, grape color. That makes sense, but then it makes a little bit less sense when you look at words for things like city, goat, joke colored. It's not even clear what that would mean. I didn't just copy things directly from Arabic, though. I also copied them from Esperanto. So Esperanto is famous for having this big table of correlatives where you change the first part of the word and keep the last part, and you get some sort of a function word that changes slightly. So kio is what and chio is al, because it begins with a cha, means everything, and then the io means a thing. Well, I just copied that exact same thing into Megdevi, even with a table of correlatives and everything. And as a result of doing this, the language was really, really horrible, just awful in every aspect. It's kind of like if you like chocolate chip cookies, yeah, which is a thing that you can like, and you also like ketchup, you might think, well, okay, those are both good things. Why don't we combine them? And it's just, no, it simply does not work. You see, I loved languages, and in particular, I loved particular things about particular languages. But what I discovered after, creating this monstrosity is that even though I took the things I loved about this language and the things I loved about that language and put them together into a new language, that the result of that wasn't like some super language that I was in love with. And so once I realized this, the language held no interest for me anymore. And so I abandoned it and moved on to something else. It was around this time that I met other language creators for the first time, who were language enthusiasts just like me, but they also created languages, and indeed created languages for fun. And I started to learn something about what it was they did and how they did things better. I also at this time discovered a few resources on the Hawaiian language, not a ton, but I found these absolutely amazing dictionaries, the old Elbert and Pukui dictionaries, but they're dictionaries, they're not language learning materials. So I also found this regrettable book, Beginner's Hawaiian, which makes a couple of interesting choices. Among them that they kind of don't tell you what the glottal stop is really, or don't give you an accurate portrayal of what it is, and also don't write it all the time, and decided to never write long vowels in Hawaiian, which if you know Hawaiian, that simply does not work. Anyway, so I really had a burning desire to learn the Hawaiian language as much as I could because I found it so beautiful. I think largely probably as a result of listening to the music of Israel Kamakawiwo'ole, whose music was just amazing and blew me away. So since I couldn't find adequate resources on the Hawaiian language, I thought, well, why don't we do the next best thing? We'll just chop up Israel Kamakawiwo'ole's name and create Kamakawi, a language that's kind of like Hawaiian. And this was really my goal with the language. I thought, all right, I love the Hawaiian language. I can't get it. So why don't I just try to copy it a little bit, and I will end up with something that I think I'm really happy with. And so, for example, here are the consonants of Hawaiian. All I did with Kamakawi was I added a few, basically. Those three right there. And then with the vowels, I couldn't really wrap my head around the concept of long vowels. I wonder why, given the book I had. So I kind of got rid of the long vowels. And then with Hawaiian, you have words like this are very well known, where one of the characteristics of Hawaiian is that its words can be chopped into small syllables, that is with one consonant or none at the beginning, and never any consonants at the end of the syllable. So that type of structure was really easy to copy. And so I ended up with a bunch of words that kind of looked like they might be in Hawaiian, except for the occasional consonant that wasn't supposed to be there. I also emulated the grammar a little bit by mostly copying the structure where you can see, for example, it's the same thing where the verb, the subject, and the object come next to one another. It still has definite articles, but they work a little bit differently in Kamakawi than they do in Hawaiian. There's some extra quirks that happen in Kamakawi. So essentially, I took kind of like the shell of Hawaiian, tinkered it a little bit, changed the grammar, and produced the Kamakawi language. Now, the result of that, though, was something that was kind of like, I don't know, it wasn't as if I produced something original. It was more like, I don't know, it was more like putting on a costume and pretending to copy a popular meme or something. It's not exactly the same thing. It kind of looks like it. And so I guess if the point was, I don't know, to make fun of it, that might work. But I was trying to produce a language that I would really love and really be happy with. But the truth is, once I was finished with Kamakawi, there were things about it I enjoyed, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I did Hawaiian. The truth was, I really just wanted to learn the Hawaiian language, and I didn't have a way to do it. And so for that reason, I kind of had to move on to something else. You know, I did a number of languages like these, where essentially there was a language that really captured my interest, where I couldn't get the resources to learn it as well as I might have wanted to. And so I created like an homage language to it. I did it with Turkish, I did it with Greek, with Hausa, Nuktitut, Mandarin, Potawatomi. But ultimately the result was never as satisfying because my goal was always to, I guess, try to approach those original languages rather than to create something new and original. And so that's where I moved into next. So we have, in language creation, we have something called naturalism. And naturalism is where you create a language that is supposed to emulate the way our languages on Earth work, which is our languages are the way they are because the sounds evolve over time, the meanings evolve over time, and the grammar evolves over time so that the language is built up incrementally. And so I started to build languages like that, where I started out with something small and built up incrementally, changed it over time, weathered it, until it eventually produced a result that had to be unique because the elements that went into it were unique. And that is something that I've done profitably for quite some time. I've created dozens of languages like this. Here are just a few of them. The thing I realized is that more than anything else, I just love language in the abstract. And I also love their particulars. So I love studying as many different languages as I possibly can, but I also like creating them. It's a different and unique joy to study a language that exists somewhere in the world that you happen to like, versus actually creating something that's brand new, that is kind of an authentic representation of your idea of how you're going to attack the problem of communication. That's something that I really, really enjoy, and something that gets me up every day and keeps me creating languages 20 years later. While I may be less naive now about both the nature of language and also the languages that exist on our planet, I think the drive is still there. So what I still enjoy the most is just the fact that, I mean, think of anything that you can say in any language, even if it's something simple, because this is one of the first things you learn in saying my name is, right? In English, my name is David. In Spanish, me llamo David. And it's different. It's not just like, I mean, yeah, they translate roughly to the same way, but it's different in that suddenly Spanish is using a verb where you are the object. So it's not, you're not saying my name. It's not mi nombre es David. It's I am called David, and that seems to be the usual way to do it. And that's the question, why? Why is it different? Why do the words not translate one-to-one? And how many different ways can you attack that problem of how you are solving the problem of communication, even if it's something just as really teeny tiny as my name is whatever? if you think about it, there's probably dozens of ways you could do that. Even just using English words, it's, I guess, a matter of happenstance or custom, which one will be the one that you use. And so that, I think, is one of the things that's still super fun to me. It was crazy amazing to me that when I started studying French and started paying attention to Spanish, that you didn't just say, my name is blank. And then that's just one phrase amongst the millions and millions and millions of things that you say in a given language. It's always slightly different. And then it's surprising when it's exactly the same. You're like, what? These languages are totally unrelated, and yet they say those two things exactly the same. Huh, that's fun. Anyway, I mean, that's really what it is. It's just fun. Gracias, danke, merci, queremos. Thanks for listening, and I'll take any questions you have.
David, I think I could listen to you talking about the details of how you construct a language until you perished from exhaustion from talking about it. There's so much in there.
I mean, I certainly do enjoy it, and frankly, I would talk until I perish from exhaustion if you gave me purchase. So
please,
it's good you stopped me.
Please don't perish on my account. It would be too sad and such a waste. You mentioned your first constructed language, Megdevi. Did Megan also speak it? Did you have like a special couples language together?
I mean, that was the idea, but the answer, of course, is certainly not. No, no. This was. I think the best analogy is when Homer in The Simpsons, when Homer gave Marge a bowling ball with the name Homer engraved on it. It just, I guess, his idea is like, oh yeah, here's this gift for you. And it's like nothing she could possibly be interested in. And I think that's really what happened with Megdevi, because I actually did create it as like a gift. In fact, I gifted to her, I think on her birthday. But I don't know. I don't think it ever occurred to me that nobody else would possibly be interested. But, I did it anyway. Just because, I mean, really, I think it's just to keep me human so that at any point in time somebody could bring this up and humiliate me. I really think that's its sole purpose. Yeah.
What if you suddenly find that somewhere on the internet there's a flourishing community of Megdevi speakers?
I don't know. I'd be embarrassed for them, I guess. I don't know.
People love what they love.
No, that's true. That's true. I mean, and if somebody found some enjoyment out of it, I mean, that's cool. I just can't anymore. It's too much for me. It's too much.
When you're inventing languages for, say, TV or film, are there any criteria that you have to fit in from the production side? Like sometimes do they say, well, we need all the words to be really short because the whole show is only 42 minutes long? Things like that.
Oh yeah, no, there are concerns like that crop up all the time. Some of them come from my end, which is that sometimes the production doesn't actually care like how difficult the language is to pronounce, but
rude.
I have to.
That's hard for an actor.
That's the thing. So I have to keep in mind that no matter what, if the actor gets it and they can't pronounce it, and I know that I'm not going to be able to be there to give them support, then they're going to do what they can do, and the result may be really, really clumsy, and it may not come off sounding very natural and authentic. So I usually have to dial it back on my end so that it's like there's only a couple things that they may struggle with, and hopefully they can switch to some other sound and it'll still come out all right. And then maybe some of them will get it exactly right, most of the time, which is great. So there are concerns like that. There are concerns that one would never consider when it came to a natural language. For example, things like even something as simple as like second person plurals or occlusivity. Things like that can be very difficult to determine if you're only looking at the script. In other words, like the dialogue says, I mean, if it's something like, we need to get out of here, sure, it's probably inclusive. But other times when you use we, you might think, okay, this is probably inclusive. And then you go and you actually watch the show. And it's like, oh, no. They were saying that to somebody else about them. I used the wrong we. And it's because you just don't know how things are blocked. You don't know what's going to be there on the day of the set. And so those distinctions, which are so natural, in language, become a bit difficult. So I tend to shy away from those, not for any good reason, but simply because you don't know everything that's going to happen in the course of a show. So there are areas like that
yourself,
where I have to
blame
pull
English
back.
for being so slippery.
Yeah, well, that's true, actually. That's interesting. If English did have a very strong second person plural, or like even a first person inclusive distinction, right? That would be built right into the script. And so the script writers would always know, and then you just follow that. There should be a meta language for writing scripts that has all distinctions so that it's absolutely 100% clear what is meant. Oh, wow. No, that's an idea.
If only English had been designed rather than just be this scruffy mess that's built up in the way that it has, your job would be much easier.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it has to be an invented language. It has to be, all scripts need to be written in the same invented language. They all need to be written in Ithkuil so that it's absolutely clear exactly what is meant. And then you can translate it faithfully into whatever, other language you're using, like English or Spanish or whatever. That's the ideal. That's what we need to be doing. Thank you.
Just another thing to blame English for. When will its trail of destruction end? But speaking of, I suppose, the difficulties and imperfections in a natural language, you've got very imperfect language. You've got all these irregularities. You've got all these idioms that grew up over time. You've got these metaphors that don't really make sense, even if you have been speaking them all your life. And you've got these priorities that are so specific to the society where that language has been growing up. Like, how do you come up with all that yourself rather than with millions of people over thousands of years?
Yeah, you kind of just have to imagine it. You have to imagine what that culture has been like, how it's grown up, where the people have been and what they've done over the millennia. Honestly, that's really the big trick, right? That's really the art that conlangers bring to their language, and at least for that type of a language, part of what it should be judged on is how well you imagine this culture, how well you fleshed it out, or how well you match the language to the culture if somebody else created it. That can be difficult for TV and film for two reasons. One is when it's being invented on the fly, as was the case when I was working on Defiance, because it's the type of thing where it's like, all right, as I'm working, since this culture hasn't been invented yet, I'm imagining it a certain way, and so I build in certain idioms into the language that I think makes sense. And then, season 2, episode 7 or something, they just drop this in. It's like, oh, where our people have always been blah, 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 which like totally contradicts everything that you did. And it's like, because, it's not just one person that's in charge of it. You can always fall back on, well, there are many different parts of every different society, so this reflects this one. But it's like, yeah, but then why did that come to prominence? I don't know. Anyway, so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is when there is one person in charge and it's not you. So, for example, with George R. R. Martin on Game of Thrones, everything that he is, created culture-wise is very clear, but we don't always get all of those notes. We got a lot of information about the Dothraki, not very much information about the Valyrians from old Valyria. And so that's made building the Valyrian language very difficult because there's just too much invention on my part. Like, there's a lot of stuff where I just have to imagine what I think he might have been going for with this culture with very little textual support, which means that I could invent something that could very easily be overwritten because I was simply wrong. So that makes it challenging. Obviously, the easiest thing to do is, it's your own culture and your own language, and you're completely in charge. basically, if you're in the role of somebody like Tolkien, where you have the fiction and the language and you're the master of both, that's the easiest way to make sure you're doing it 100% right.
Do you feel like a god just at the dawn of time thinking, well, I'm going to create some elephants today?
Not really. I mean, no, but it's like that. It's funny. There's this huge, this huge vein of conlanging where there's kind of like a defense of conlanging that goes back to the Bible and references to subcreation and blah blah blah. I don't know. I just I just always think of it as just having fun, and this is the way I'm doing it. And it's like, and if somebody picks it up and they don't like it, they can do something different. I don't know. I don't know. I just never thought of it that way. At least not myself. I don't know. I don't get too much into it like that, I guess.
And in your talk, you mentioned that a language is never finished. So do you still go back and put some new adverbs into Dothraki, anything like that?
Oh yeah, constantly. I mean, I have so many languages at this point that it's unlikely that I go back to any specific one. But yeah, I'm going through and adding stuff to the languages all the time. Like even if the shows never really got off the ground, like Star-Crossed or Emerald City, I'm still working with those languages because the part that I liked was the language. That's the part I was working on. That's the part I enjoyed, and I still enjoy them. My enjoyment for them didn't derive from the fact that it was attached to some show. So yeah, I'm still working on them all the time.
David J. Peterson, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Right on. Thanks for having me.